Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 2020's Coffee Talk, a chill game about being a barista in a modern fantasy version of Seattle with an equally relaxing lo-fi hip-hop soundtrack.
Following that is the mashup of the genre and the original composer of the Ace Attorney series, mixed with the nonogram gameplay of Picross, 2020's Murder by Numbers. This has to be the first time that we've both talked about games from the year that we're currently in.
I think so.
These are games from 2020. They're visual novel style indie games. You should definitely go check them out right now. They may be up for contention in our best of 2020 list at the end of the year. Who knows?
Potentially. Yeah, I mean, it's not like we have a huge pool to select from this year so far, but that is not to say anything bad about the quality of these soundtracks. They're both very good, I think, and I'm very interested to talk about them. But, real quick, before we do that, we are partnering with Nintendo World Report and the developers of the game No Straight Roads to give away a copy of the soundtrack. 3 copies of the soundtrack on vinyl and 3 digital codes for runners-up. So, how do you enter this giveaway? Well, before 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on September 3rd, that is Thursday, so you have 2 days if you're listening to this episode on the day it comes out, you have to go follow us. I hope you're already following us if you're listening to this show. Follow Nintendo World Report at Nintendo_NWR and follow the No Straight Roads Twitter account. That is at No Straight Roads, all one word. And then go to our Twitter and find our pinned tweet and quote retweet it telling us what your favorite video game soundtrack is. And if you do that, you'll be entered into a random drawing for either one of 3 copies of the vinyl of the No Straight Roads soundtrack, or if you're one of the 3 runners-up, you'll get a free digital code to download the soundtrack. It is a very, very good soundtrack featuring multiple artists such as Falk Ao Young, Andy Tunstall, James Landino, Funk Fiction, and most interestingly for our show, Masahiro Aoki, who we have talked about for his work on Street Fighter V. So that's pretty cool. And if you want a sample of what some of the music in this game sounds like, this is the music for the boss fight against the character Sayu. Now, a quick disclaimer, I am doing the review for the game on Nintendo World Report, but also, disclaimer, we're not being paid for this. We were approached, and it's really cool that we get to do something like this, so you should definitely sign up. It's a really good soundtrack, and I wish I could enter. I cannot, though, because we're running it.
Yeah, very, very cool partnership. Of course, that does not affect Joe's review score as well. Not at all. So, yeah, simply go to Soundchat OST on Twitter, look at our pinned tweet. That gives you all the instructions if you'd like to win the soundtrack to No Straight Roads. So, thank you again. Like, that's such a cool opportunity for all involved.
Yeah.
But, Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
Well, I recently finished Kirby 64 for Smasterpieces, so hopefully... Excellent. Soon that episode, I don't know. Matt hasn't started yet at time of recording. He is planning on blowing through it in one go. And then we also have our guest who is working through it himself as well. Otherwise, I finished your game for this week. I had been stalled on the last case and decided, no, if we're going to do it for the show, I need to finish it. So I did sit down and completed that. And then I also played a little short game, one of the ones that came out in that Indie Direct a couple weeks ago. I played Takeshi and Hiroshi. Little short, like hour and a half long game. Very cute, neat little game. Definitely feels very mobile game-y, but I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
That's with the guy designing the RPG for his brother, right?
Correct. The one that has like cutscenes that look like they're out of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. They're stop motion puppets, which is pretty cool, honestly. It's pretty good. It has some real huge problems with like, oh boy, the RNG really screwed me over this time. Guess I'll start over. And that's really my only complaint. It's small, it's cheap. If you're interested in that kind of thing, I'd give it a shot.
Good to hear, for sure. I played the beta for... open beta, I'm not going to pretend it was some exclusive thing. For Marvel's Avengers. Didn't get on with the game as well as I thought I would. So that's a little disappointing. But at the same time, probably for the best, because my backlog is immense right now. Looking at the games that I wrote down, I need to get to Microsoft Flight Simulator, Battletoads, Tell Me Why, Control, Pistol Whip, and Iron Man VR. Yeah, work's been crazy, and I need to sit down and play some games.
On my end, it's Spiritfarer, Raji, Rainy Season, Necrobarista. I still haven't touched Ghost of Tsushima. So those are my main worries for games that came out this year, personally. So I feel that. I haven't played the beta myself, but the general consensus I got from a couple friends was, it's alright. Don't know if I'd pay $60 for it, but it's alright.
Right. Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. Well, we got a couple months to go through it before early November gets crazy for next gen, if that's your bag. Let's talk about some composer follow-up news. Of course, we talk about so many composers and musicians on this show that they're still working on things. They're still doing cool stuff. Let's talk about some of the headlines from this past week. I was watching the limited Netflix series called High Score on Netflix, which is it's a video game history little documentary produced by Great Big Story. It's narrated by Charles Martinet, the voice of Mario. And in episode 2, when they're talking about like the history of Nintendo, who happens to pop up but Hirokazu Hip Tanaka does an interview with them. So cool to see him, and he's more talking about like, oh, this is how we did sound effects in the early 80s, like for Donkey Kong, things like that. But it's just, hey, neat to see him in that.
That is such an interesting sort of topic, because that was back in the day when you had to know programming to do music for games, because you had to program the music into the game, essentially. So, same with sound effects. So, hey, that sounds very interesting, and I haven't checked out the documentary yet, but maybe I should.
I will say it's good to watch along with my girlfriend. For me, it's like a lot of kind of refresher stuff. I mean, maybe sometimes you don't know like some of the Atari stories or how did Miss Pac-Man get made? But at the same time, for someone who is pretty new to understanding the medium or has an interest in it, it's a good watch on that front. I've seen people say like, yeah, it doesn't tackle some of like the not so great parts of the industry and tries to make everything all nice and positive, but certain documentaries have certain roles and places, I guess.
Meanwhile, Lena Raine, the composer behind Celeste, announced a new album called Re-Knowing, which is a remix album of her 2019 album One Knowing, which was very good. If you have not heard it, it's on Spotify and is very good. And you can also go buy it on Bandcamp, which is actually probably what you should do, more than anything. But yeah, it's very good. This album features remixes by Jukio Kallio, the composer behind Minute, and Yasunori Nishiki, the composer behind Octopath Traveler, among many others that I'm not familiar with a lot of the names that were on there, but she has been sort of detailing some of them on her Twitter, over the past couple of days, so go check that out if you want to, learn some more about this music. It releases September 9th, but it is up for pre-order right now.
In a surprise out of nowhere Nintendo Direct Mini, which was more like a partner showcase, but even still, the game Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory was highlighted, specifically that it's going to be releasing on November 13th for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Switch. A rhythm game of Kingdom Hearts music, and of course that's important because Yoko Shimomura, Kingdom Hearts music. Though Let It Go will be in there, and that's not Yoko Shimomura, but even still, really cool.
I'm very excited for that game, even though it might be bad. I don't know. It might be bad, but like a rhythm game with Kingdom Hearts music is actually something I've wanted for a while. I was kind of hoping we'd get a theatrhythm game of Kingdom Hearts, but I will take this.
At the very least, they'll have a cutscene worth of new story elements, and that should be most interesting.
One single cutscene, and it'll be the most important cutscene in the franchise. Meanwhile, because the universe likes to laugh at my pain, on the same day, November 13th, Yakuza Like a Dragon, aka Yakuza 7, is set to release for PS4, Xbox One, and PC, with a PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X release to occur later on. Both of these games releasing on the same day is a curse aimed specifically at myself, and I don't appreciate it.
Wouldn't entirely surprise me if PS5 and Xbox One were released at least close to November 13th. And there is the whole thing that way back when, a few months ago, they announced that Yakuza Like a Dragon would be there day one on Xbox Series X. So, interesting. But of course, Hidenori Shoji and others on the composition team for that, I'm sure. And finally, Cadence of Hyrule, the Legend of Zelda mix with Crypt of the Necrodancer game, has its DLC Pack 2 now available. This features new remixes from different YouTube and fan composers. So we've mentioned Family Jewels on the show. We had Chip Zell mentioned on the show, most recently in the River City Girls episode, and she'll be highlighted in an upcoming episode on her own. And A_Rival also featured in this DLC Pack 2 for Cadence of Hyrule. Really cool opportunity for them to have their music remixes be in a Legend of Zelda game.
Yeah, it's, I have bought the pack. I haven't gone to listen to any of the music yet. I've been a little busy, but I didn't even need to hear any of the tracks before I was like, yeah, no, buy. Immediate. Let's do it. I'm really looking forward to the last one because the last pack is the actual like story campaign pack where you play as Skull Kid. That sounds fun, but I will take this. This is worth I think it's $5, $6 for 3 entire new soundtracks on the game. Yeah, let's do it. All right. I'm pretty sure that takes the record for the longest pre-start we've ever done. But hey, a lot happened and we are involved in some stuff. So let's get into our first game being Coffee Talk. Coffee Talk was originally released on January 29th, 2020 on PC, Xbox One, PS4, and Nintendo Switch. So pretty much anywhere you play video games, you're going to be able to get a hold of Coffee Talk if it's a modern platform.
But what about Google Stadia?
This is one of the only games that would work on Google Stadia. But no, it's not on Google Stadia.
You're like, I know what I said.
It was developed by Indonesian studio Toge Productions, Toge. I'm not 100% clear on how to pronounce that. I think it's Toge. But I'm not 100%. So if somebody from that studio is listening and I have butchered the pronunciation, please scream at me on Twitter. I would very much appreciate that. It was self-published on PC and Switch and published by Chorus Worldwide on PS4 and Xbox One. It's a very similar game. It is a visual novel that is very, very similar to a game we have talked about on the show in the past, being Valhalla Cyberpunk Bartender Action. Shout out to episode 7, That was so long ago, and yet feels like yesterday.
Wow, and we're on, 84?
Yeah, 84! We're going to hit 100 before the end of the year. That's bizarre.
Woof.
So, in Coffee Talk, the player takes control of the owner and barista of a small coffee shop in modern-day Seattle, Washington called the Coffee Talk. It's called Coffee Talk. That's what the cafe is called. This shop is unique in that it only opens in the evening, which means it's typically not super busy because not a lot of people are looking for coffee after sundown. And more than just passing new customers, it tends to bring in regulars. The customers that come to this cafe tend to be the people that are the ones that show up almost on a nightly basis. So every night, you talk to the customers, and they'll also talk to each other. Just like Valhalla, there are no dialogue options. Your only ability to affect the story is driven entirely by the various drinks that you provide to those customers. But obviously, instead of alcohol, like in Valhalla, it's stuff like coffee, tea, hot chocolate, mugs of milk, stuff like that. Another twist is that while the game takes place in modern day, in a real-world city that you can go to, well, that you could have flown to in the before times, the world of Coffee Talk is inhabited not just by humans, but also by various fantasy races such as werewolves, orcs, elves, all sorts of stuff, nekomimis. Customers include people like Freya, a human who works as a writer for one of the city's biggest newspapers, who has found herself in an unfortunate but kind of promising position for her career. She actually serves as the game's mascot. If you've seen the green-haired lady on like all of the game's marketing, that's Freya. She's great. Gala, a werewolf who works as head of administration at the nearby hospital. Lua and Baileys, a succubus and elf couple who are struggling with the fact that their families do not approve of their relationship due to racial prejudices. Rachel, a nekomimi musician who has recently left her girl group in order to break into a solo career despite her father's many worries, and many more. There's like 10 or so different regulars that you'll interact with throughout the course of this game. Probably more. I'm probably lowballing that number a little bit. Every character has their own plot line. They all like weave in and out of each other. They like mingle with each other. Certain characters' plots will be pushed along by meeting another character who isn't really involved in their situation, but their insight and their point of view will sort of help them along in their story, that kind of thing. And it's all presented with wonderfully detailed and animated sprite art. Like, honestly, this game might have some of the best sprite art I've ever seen in a game of this type, ever. All the characters will look at their phone, they'll look at the characters that they're talking to, they're always moving. I don't know how else to describe it other than they seem like they are actually beings that exist in that cafe instead of just a avatar for a visual novel. And it's got a really chill, rainy atmosphere because apparently in Seattle it is always raining. You go through that entire game, not a single night is it not pouring down rain outside. And it's got a really, really good lo-fi soundtrack that really makes it a perfect, relaxing time game. And this is where I will ask, Peter, what are your experiences with Coffee Talk?
I have the game. I own it on Xbox One. It's currently installed on my Xbox One X. There was some sort of promotion, I think it was through like Games with Gold or something like that, where for a little bit of time, the game was actually free for those who had Xbox Live Gold. So got it there. It may even be on Game Pass. Not entirely sure about that.
I don't think it is. It's not on PC at least.
Okay. But even still, it's sitting there installed on my Xbox, and I still have yet to get to Valhalla. And I feel like for a proper comparison, I should probably do that first. But yeah, have not played Coffee Talk, have seen the art, had not heard the soundtrack. That was interesting. But yeah, don't know too much about it.
Weirdly enough, Valhalla was never mentioned, like, in any of the stuff during my research, even though this game is almost, like, if you put both games and stripped them down to their barest sort of features.
Essence, yeah.
Yeah, they're the same game. Like, just entirely. It's just one takes place in a fantasy-ish world, and the other, takes place in a cyberpunk city. That's really the major difference. And alcohol, obviously. There's no alcohol in Coffee Talk. But I have played it. I played it all on stream, actually, doing voices for all of the characters, and my voice hated me for it because, wow. Turns out that I need to stop doing games with a lot of, like, text dialogue, because it's really fun for the first hour, and then your throat's just like, what if we just stopped, though? So, that's fun. But it's really good, I think. I think it might be among my favorite games of the year. Probably not in the top 5, but definitely in the top 10. I think its soundtrack is very good, though it's really hard to judge because it's not a genre we've really touched on this show before. We've had a couple of songs on various soundtracks that have approached it.
True.
But I don't think we've ever done a soundtrack that is entirely comprised of it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to talk about the music when we get there.
And just generally, like, the cast is really fun. And they all interact in a very well-written manner. The game is extremely well-written. It has an ending that sort of implies there's something else going on, and immediately drove me to be like, so when I finish games on the Switch, I will basically archive them immediately once I finish them. Like when I finished Murder by Numbers this week, I archived it immediately because I finished it. And if I want to go back to it, I could reinstall it. The archive feature on the Switch is great. The thing that it did at the end of Coffee Talk, I was like, well, I can't archive it because I think I need to go play it again now. I haven't done it yet, but eventually I will. But it's just a really nice game to play, like, to wind down. Or, like, if it rained very often here in August, I would probably say, like, it's the best time. That's the best time to play it. Best time to play this game is rain. So, let's get into some of the not a lot of information I found about the development of Coffee Talk. When doing my research, I always start with the Wikipedia article if there is one, and then I go and look into its source articles. The one source article that I think could have given me more information, and quotes to pull from and stuff, was a dead link, which I've come to expect from games that came out pre-2010, but not games that came out in January of this year. That was a new experience, so did what I could. I think I found some pretty interesting stuff, though. So according to the developers, a lot of the inspiration for the game came from a Japanese TV show called Midnight Diner. As one might expect from the name of the show, it is about a diner that is only open at midnight. And it follows the chef at this diner and his involvement in the lives of the customers that come to the diner. Pretty easy point A to point B line to draw from there to a game about a coffee shop that only opens in the evening. While the game takes place in a fantasy universe, its menu is actually made up of real-life drinks from around the world, including masala chai from India, teh tarik from Malaysia, and Shai Adeni from Yemen. Those are just the ones that the Wikipedia article mentions. There are some fictional drinks on there, but for the most part, unlike Valhalla, it uses real-world ingredients. So, like, you mix chocolate and then you throw in some ginger and maybe some cinnamon, and that'll make a drink. Or you throw in coffee and you put in lemon and I don't know, sugar, and that'll make a different drink. It's kind of that thing, and like the order that you put the ingredients in also matters. It's very interesting. But the reason that there are so many real-world drinks on the menu was to give the players a sense of belonging in the world. They wanted it to be tied to something that you could actually potentially go drink in the real world, so that it wasn't too fantastic a setting. The existence of the fantasy races was meant to allow the developers to easily tie parallels to real-life experiences and issues, which you can actually see most clearly at the beginning of each day, you get to see the newspaper headlines for that day. And there are headlines about orcs protesting because the world has stereotyped them into being stupid and dangerous, which they're not. Various unsafe medications to sedate werewolves during the full moon are being sold irresponsibly, stuff like that. But above all, the game sets out to talk about these issues in a very personal way, with you meeting characters who are actually experiencing these problems. Their main goal, above all else for Coffee Talk, was to create a game where players could just feel comfortable and warm, very much the same as you would sitting in a nice, cozy cafe with a warm cup of coffee. And I think the game does very well at that tone. Reviewed generally pretty well upon release. Its highest Metacritic score is a 76 on the Switch version, and the lowest is a 70 on the PS4 version. It was praised for its relaxing atmosphere and impressive visuals, though a lot of the criticism went after its short length, which, again, another game that I genuinely don't understand how that's a problem.
How long is it?
5-6 hours?
Oh, come on. For that kind of game, that's plenty.
Like, it's not that long, but it's not like it's over in an hour and a half or something like that. I think it's a pretty good length. I had to take 2 streams to finish it, 2 3-hour streams. So, and the other criticism that some critics threw at it were they felt like it didn't explore the world's issues enough, like that world's issues, not like the world's issues, which kind of the same thing, but they felt like it didn't delve deeper into like the quote unquote lore of the world of the game, which I can see that, but I think it did enough. And honestly, who knows how it'll fare in awards season? That's the weird thing about us doing games that came out this year is awards season hasn't happened yet, so we don't know. I hope it's up for some awards. It shows like the IGF. We'll just have to wait and see. I don't see this game turning heads at like the Game Awards though. So,
right. It's a really good year for indie games in 2020.
Yeah, I think it's going to get nudged out by a few bigger titles, but I kind of hope that at stuff like the IGF, I think for like narrative awards and stuff, I think it should be up for those. I hope so. The music for Coffee Talk was done by Andrew Jeremy. So, Toga's website, on their About page, lists all of the people that work there and gives them all classes, like character classes. Andrew Jeremy is listed as a Mecha Samurai. His full name is Andrew Jeremy Sitomple, but he goes by AJ. He also happened to serve as the game's project manager. You can follow him on Twitter at Ndru Jeremy. That's Ndru Jeremy, which is an award-winning Twitter name. It's so good. And that's all the information I have for you. As for video games, as far as I can tell, there are 2 games he has worked on, one being Coffee Talk, and the other being a game called Necronator Dead Wrong, which is a deck-building roguelike RTS that apparently released in July, also by Toga Productions, but I could not find if he did the music for that game, or if he was just, like, the project manager again, or something like that.
Sure is a mishmash of genres, though.
Yeah, I mean, those sound like genres that might fit well together, I don't know. But yeah, I couldn't find any other information outside of that, so... So, music in Coffee Talk is also very similar to how it works in Valhalla. If you remember when we talked about that game, or if you've played that game, in Valhalla, the background music is not really matched to any event. It's just, you have a jukebox, and you set up a playlist at the start of each night, and that music is what plays in the bar all night during the scenes. It's not really matched to scenes or anything, which I think unfortunately kind of takes away from some of the impact that the soundtrack could have, but I mean, when the music is still good, it's still good. Coffee Talk works very similarly, except instead of being a jukebox, you are controlling it from your in-game phone, where you can skip songs if you don't want to listen to them anymore, but they'll sort of fade in and out on their own as they go. I might be wrong, but it kind of felt like the game regularly picked really good music for the scene that was playing. And maybe that's just that all of the music is kind of this same sort of vibe, that it all just sort of matches pretty well what's going on. But I don't think I had the problem of the songs being sort of mismatched to their moments as much as I did in Valhalla.
Yeah, because that was Valhalla's big critique, right? Was that you set up the playlist, but you don't know what's coming, and so there may be a mishmash of what's going on.
Yeah, pretty much. Otherwise, one thing that I really do want to point out that's really funny to me is because you are controlling it on your phone, it's got a music player, and it shows like album art and the name of the song. And the music is all credited to Arami Gendru. That's who made it in universe. Which is absolutely fantastic. I love it. So what does this game sound like? Well, let's go ahead and jump into it with our 5 critical tracks, with the first one being Come Closer. So this is lo-fi hip-hop beats to relaxing coffee to. This is generally the vibe that the whole soundtrack gives off. This is my favorite song, I think, on the soundtrack overall.
Agreed. Yes.
It's the one I keep coming back to when I'm listening to it. It's just this really catchy piano piece and this heavy beat. And when I think of Coffee Talk, I think of this song specifically nowadays.
Yeah, so lo-fi hip-hop, you're right to reference that YouTube video / playlist that everyone, I think, has seen in their recommendeds. Yeah, definitely a different vibe, a different purpose for the music, just to really be in the background as mood setting. And it's going to be all about building layers over time and maybe taking away some of those layers, but just to have it fade in the background for the ambiance. You're not going to have it be all about being energetic and melody driven and things like this. Yeah, melody may play a part if you listen closely enough, but it's just meant to be there as you focus on, say, the conversation in Coffee Talk or your homework or things like that. I think also interesting to note the static in the background of these tracks. Not something I care for personally. I almost thought it would have the feeling of like, oh, it's records playing in the coffee shop. It's a choice. I feel like a rainy ambiance layered on top of it in-game might have fared better, especially if you mentioned that rain is so important. But yeah, no, this one is definitely the one that stands out the most. It reminds me a ton of the Stray Sheep theme from Catherine.
Ah, yeah, I can hear that.
Like a whole lot. Same kind of feel and vibe, I think, but you'll see how the other tracks are, I shouldn't say see, you'll hear how the other tracks are pretty similar in this regard of, yeah, we picked the clip that like it sounds the most melodically involved, but it starts pretty bare bones and then it just adds more layers over time.
Mm-hmm. And they're also like, the layers are very repetitive, which works very well in this genre's favor, I think. Because like you said, it's built to be doing something during, which is already kind of what video game music is built for in the first place. So this genre kind of fits right in on that idea. Meanwhile, critical track number 2 is Moon Bright. So this song specifically is Andrew Jeremy's arrangement of Claude Debussy's Clair de Lune, which I didn't realize until Peter put that down on the outline, and then I listened to it again and said, oh, hey, it is!
Shoutouts to the soundtrack having really good credits that note that specifically. It sometimes helps when you have official soundtrack releases when you do things like that, so it's a note to game developers and musicians out there.
Very weird that this is the second game in less than a year that I've played where Clair de Lune is one of the songs. The other one being Sayonara Wild Hearts.
Oh, yeah.
Where Clair de Lune also shows up at the very beginning of the game.
Well, we might be talking about that game by year's end.
Probably sooner than you think. Yeah, it's I really, really like this song. I liked it before I knew it was Clair de Lune, and now I kind of like it a little bit more that I know it's Clair de Lune. But once again, it's that same sort of vibe as Come Closer, and honestly, as the rest of the songs on the Critical 5. Because while I really, really like this soundtrack, I will admit that when talking about it in this medium specifically, they do kind of blend together slightly.
And I feel like oftentimes it's, with lo-fi and things like that, it's often the drum kit. Like the drum kit sounds pretty similar, and if you start using similar instruments like piano, it may blend a little bit together. Favorite uses of Clair de Lune in media, video games, whatever? What comes to mind for you?
I think it's just Sayonara Wild Hearts that I can think of, which that intro into the game, while that is not, for me, the moment where you're like, oh, so this game's amazing, it is one of the very first hints at, oh, this game might be really good. So I think I'd give it to Sayonara Wild Hearts, honestly.
I agree. That's a great use in Sayonara Wild Hearts. First time I ever heard of Clair de Lune was in Ocean's 11, the 2001 film. Great use there. But since then, I love the song. Who doesn't love Clair de Lune? Fantastic song. But Rain, which was a little indie game on PS3, was something that focused heavily on Clair de Lune. And I ended up platinuming that game because it was a really easy platinum to clean up and get, honestly. But it's got to be Danganronpa V3. And if I just said that and memories flooded back, oh yeah, big part of Danganronpa V3 is Clair de Lune right there. So yeah, it's always interesting to hear whether it's takes on it or the original itself. It fits perfectly in a lo-fi vibe for sure.
One of these days I'll understand the Danganronpa's stuff. Again, the first one has been installed on my computer since before we talked about it on the show, which I want to say was a year ago.
I'm just saying, you like Ace Attorney, you like Persona, you're going to like Danganronpa.
Anyways, let's get to critical track number 3. It Smells Good. I think this one probably comes in second when it comes to songs that I tend to think a lot about when I'm thinking about Coffee Talk. This one is very similar to Come Closer, honestly. But the high notes on the piano, I don't know, something about them just really, really feels good to listen to. I can say that about the whole soundtrack, obviously, but this one in particular really catches my ear, specifically because I think it's the high piano notes.
Yeah, the descending melody is really reminiscent of rain and raindrops and rolling down the window. Yeah, I could hear that. It's a really good one. I wish now I had played Coffee Talk to get the vibe of what it's like to be in the coffee shop with this music playing.
I definitely recommend it. I think a lot of this music really sort of blends in with everything when you're playing the game, which is the goal. That's what the music is specifically trying to do. It's not there to be a set piece. It's there to be a backing track, basically. This soundtrack is very successful at that. And then going to listen to it, I think I actually did, for real, while doing my research, had the soundtrack playing, which, I mean, you'd think I'd do that a lot. I actually have a lot of trouble, like, writing while music is playing, so I don't tend to do that.
So you were the lo-fi homework girl in this case.
I was basically the lo-fi homework girl while I was doing research for this game, because this music is perfect for that. So, and It Smells Good is one of the songs that I had in my little quote-unquote playlist to go back to over and over again.
Well, it also sounds good, too.
Yeah. Probably doesn't... I mean, it might taste good. I don't like coffee. Coffee's fine. Let's get to critical track number 4. Something that will probably be given to you because of coffee, specifically Sleepless Mind. We're moving slightly away from the piano on this one, bringing in some guitar, very simple guitar piece, and I think it works just as well as the piano, honestly. Just the strums especially, I think, are what really make this for me. I also just really like the name because caffeine, Sleepless Mind. Do you get it? It's caffeine. Doesn't let you sleep.
Yeah, the guitar is a nice choice, and especially how relatively clean it is, not much distortion there. The strums and like the chromatic working down chords, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like, yeah, you kind of have that falling action there. So it's a different kind of vibe compared to the piano ones, but it hits a certain type of lo-fi mood.
This one specifically makes me like think of walking around an empty apartment at night in the city or something like that. Not that I have a huge amount of experience with that. I've never lived in an actual city before, or not in the middle of one at least. But like, that's the kind of vibe it gives me, like looking at all the street lights and like rain pattering up against the window. More than the others. That's what this mood gives me.
You could hear city noise working real well behind this for sure.
Yeah. And finally, critical track number 5 is Started Over. This one actually, I think, fights It Smells Good for second place. I really, really like this song. And I don't really know what more I can say about it that I didn't say about both Come Closer and It Smells Good, because again, it's a very similar piece. I know that the kick kind of sounds the same in all of the songs, but for some reason, this one really stands out to me more than it does in the others. And I can't really explain why.
Yeah, I was going to note the snare. The snare definitely has a sharper beat to it, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's something to do with the drums. I think it was either they're EQ'd a little bit differently or it's a different sort of
kit.
A different kit, yeah. I don't know. Whatever it is, it works in this song's favor a lot because I really, really like this song. All right, let's jump into the tracks on the cutting room floor. Funnily enough, these are the 2 tracks that actually do play during specific moments. One of them can play at any time, but they have their own specific moments where they do play, and the first one is Sunset in the City. Sunset in the City always plays at the beginning of the day when you're looking at the headlines, basically. The reason it's not on the Critical 5 is because, for me, the music that plays regularly during the cafe time is the important stuff and the critical stuff for this game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get that, but if it's repeated so frequently for each day, yeah, it's an important one to involve in the mix. I get that.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to make sure it was mentioned, and also it's just a really good song. But it does, the intro especially really, really fits. It always shows you a view of the coffee shop as the sun is going down and the lights turn on. And it tells you the date, and then it goes to the newspaper headlines, and then you start the day. And like you mentioned with Come Closer, it starts very bare bones, and then it builds up from there, and that really fits that sort of setting. And after that, cutting room track number 2 is Gala Gila. That's different.
Oh yeah.
So this song actually plays during a very specific moment of the story when somebody who's of the werewolf persuasion happens to burst into your shop during a full moon, and you have to deal with that. And hopefully you have found the drink that helps sedate him before this happens. Otherwise, I don't actually know what happens because I did find it. But this, I had to put this on the cutting room floor because A, it is so different from everything else on the soundtrack, and B, it's just a moment that sort of happens and it only lasts for like a minute and then it's over. You and the characters on screen are all just like, well, that sure occurred. Oh, geez. So it's a fun little jazz piece. I like it.
Yeah, super different. Drums going hard, got the bass going. Yeah, I can see how this would be a disruptive piece.
Which I assume that's why it's a completely different genre. It is actually also disrupting the soundtrack. That's really neat, I think. So I wanted to give a shout out to that as well. So what will I never forget about Coffee Talk? It's just a really chill game. It's honestly probably a game that some people might want to play now of all times. I feel like it is a great game for the times we live in because it has this perfect balance of, hey, maybe think about some of the stuff that's happening in our world, and also like, hey, just relax. Just sit down and relax. You're safe here. It's nice, warm, and cozy. I can't imagine that's an easy balance to hit, but I think this game does very well at doing it. So it's a very good time. It is worth your while if you've got some pocket change to throw at it. Got a couple hours to throw at it. I heartily recommend it.
Well, great. Now I have another one to put in my backlog.
I'm helping. See, this is why I finished your game before we talked about it. So, usually our transition would be a cover or remix by a fan. But for both games this week, couldn't find any. Not super surprising, but honestly, I'm a little bit disappointed that there's nothing from yours. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, come on, YouTube musicians.
But I'm not super surprised that there's none of mine. I imagine that lo-fi hip-hop is probably relatively difficult to remix or cover. So that might be why, but who knows? Maybe we'll get like a Rainy Mood cover by somebody before the end of the year. I'd like that. So I'm just going to throw in another piece from the soundtrack itself. So this song is called The Last Time, and we will be right back.
All right, so for our second 2020 indie visual novel game, let's talk about Murder by Numbers. Murder by Numbers released on March 5th, 2020 for Nintendo Switch and PC. It is developed by UK developer Mediatonic. Wait a minute, you're telling yourself? Mediatonic also developed big 2020 smash hit video game Fall Guys.
Yeah, when my roommate Ben was looking into Fall Guys and said Mediatonic, and I was like, what else have they made? I was like, yeah, I'm interested in that. He was like, oh, they made Murder by Numbers. I was like, wait, what? Oh, they're having a good year.
Yeah, but also talk about one game being completely dwarfed by the other.
Yeah.
So that's a thing. The game is published by the Irregular Corporation. Murder by Numbers is a murder mystery visual novel game. Very, very similar to the investigation sections of the Ace Attorney series. If you've played those, you know exactly how to generally progress through Murder by Numbers. However, once your robot companion discovers and tries to identify bits of evidence, the game transitions into the gameplay of a Picross puzzle. So let's talk about nonograms or nonogram puzzles, also known as Picross, Gridlers, Pick-a-Picks.
Griddlers? I've never heard them called griddlers. That's a terrible name.
It's making me think of pancakes, if I'm being honest.
A little bit, yeah.
Maybe it's the puzzle's the shape of a French toast. These are picture logic puzzles where cells in a grid must either be filled in or left blank according to numbers that are listed on the side of this grid to ultimately reveal a hidden picture with the filled in squares. So the numbers that I mention on the side of the puzzle, on the top or on the left, correspond to the consecutive sequence or sequences of filled squares in each row or column. That is, left to right or top down. So for example, if a puzzle is 10 by 10 squares and a column says 3, 2, then at some point in those 10 squares in the column, there will be a sequence of 3 filled in squares, followed by a sequence of 2 filled in squares with at least 1 blank square separating them. So you essentially have to compare each row and column to each other and ultimately fill out the hidden picture. If you are a fan of Picross, you're like, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And if this is completely foreign to you, let's just say, take my word for it that if you're a big fan of Sudoku puzzles, you will like Picross. You will like nonograms. Trust me on that one. So, yes, Murder by Numbers is saying, what if the big moments of an Ace Attorney game were solving Picross puzzles instead of these big contradictions in court trials? The plot of Murder by Numbers, the game is set in Los Angeles in 1996, and the game follows Honor Mizrahi, who is a TV actress and the co-star of the detective show Murder Mystery. See, it takes the whole Ace Attorney pun thing, because mystery, murder mystery, murder mystery.
And you're murdering Miss Terry?
Oh, they're so funny. Well, Honor is unexpectedly fired from her job, and she ends up coming across Scout, who is a flying and talking robot with advanced scanning technology, and he's lost most of his memories. Unfortunately, Honor's life is about to change even more as she discovers that the boss who just fired her has been murdered, and she is the lead suspect. After all, she would have motive because he just fired her. But with Scout's help, Honor manages to solve the mystery behind the murder, and this only involves the pair into a deeper web. Who is pulling the strings behind all of these murders? Why does Honor have such a knack for solving cases? And what is the truth behind Scout's missing memories? Joe, here's where I'll ask you, as you alluded to earlier, what are our experiences with Murder by Numbers?
So I just finished it like 2 nights ago, as at time of recording. And so I like it. I think the story is a lot of fun. The characters are great. I would die for Scout. I want to be KC's best friend because he seems fun. Overall, like, it's really good. I have to ask you a question real quick about one of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
Detective Cross.
Yeah.
When you thought of what his voice would sound like in your head, was he perhaps voiced by one Nick Offerman? Because that's the voice I kept hearing.
I could see that. I was thinking a little deeper, maybe a little gruffer, but I think Nick Offerman would be a great casting choice, sure.
That's the voice I was giving him pretty much the whole time. It was that I could not get it out of my head. My only issue, I like Picross, but for me, Picross is something you do like 3 or 4 puzzles to wind down at the end of a night, and then you go to bed, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing as this is a narrative game, every fiber of my being wants to play it to like a stopping point in the narrative.
Right.
And so for me, the game gets a little bit mentally exhausting, especially near the end, when it's like every single piece of evidence you pick up, you have to solve a Picross puzzle before it tells you what it was. Every single one. And granted, like, that is not me saying like, that shouldn't be how the game is. The game was built to be that, and it's great at that. That is a me problem. But like, I just, after a while, I would just start being like, I don't want to solve any more Picross puzzles. I just want to see the next part of the narrative. Can I just do the thing? I especially like eventually got kind of frustrated when it was like near the end of the game, a character's like, I forgot my toolbox. Grab it for me. So you scan the room and you find the toolbox, but you don't get to know it's the toolbox until you've done a Picross puzzle to tell you it's the toolbox. And I'm sounding very negative on the game. I'm not. I like this game a lot. I think this is a very good game. It's just, this is my disconnect between the two game types, I suppose.
And I'll give you that. It does drag on a little bit at the end, especially when you're trying to go for high completion and you have to scan everything in the area. Like, you have to solve every puzzle to get the highest score. So it can get a bit long in the tooth at the end. I get that. But for me, as someone who loves Sudoku, had never really ever done Picross, but had always had it recommended. And when I heard in one review at Nintendo World Report that it was the best tutorial to how to play and learn Picross or nonograms. To me, having that crossover with a clearly inspired Ace Attorney game, another series I love, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to give this a shot. And I highly enjoyed it. And the soundtrack is so catchy that I knew I had to eventually talk about it on the show. I just didn't think it'd be this soon. So, hey, this is perfect.
Soundtrack is honestly probably among my favorites of the year so far.
Mm-hmm. I would say it's in the top 10 and just might be at year's end. So the game was directed and written by Ed Fear, who previously wrote for 2018's The Swords of Ditto, with additional game writing help by Murray Lewis. The character design was done by Hato Moa, who had a big role to play in Hatoful Boyfriend. And the composer is one Masakazu Sugimori, who we talked about on the show before because he is the original composer from Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. And yeah, wow, you can tell. If they wanted a game that was really inspired by Ace Attorney, go get the guy whose music established the feel of Ace Attorney.
Yeah, it's a pretty good match, honestly, all things considered. I can't imagine, because I remember when we talked about Masakazu Sugimori, I feel like he hasn't worked on a game in a real long time.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And he's got a music company, apparently, where he's the president. So I don't know, maybe he's worked on smaller things. But I mean, this was the big selling point of the game, right? When the trailer first came out, it's like, it's this Picross adventure. And it looks so much like Ace Attorney. And we even got the composer to do the music. It was like, okay, you're on my radar now. So that's certainly one of the biggest selling points. But it's really, despite all the people who did work on this, like the main storytellers of the game, as far as like the development history, are Ed Fear, the big driving force behind it, working with Hatomoa for like the visual look of it and all the characters, and then Sugimori with the music. So Ed Fear enjoyed playing the first Picross game on Nintendo DS back when it came out. And it was actually where he was introduced to that puzzle concept of nanograms. And so he basically asked himself while playing, like, how could the image of completing these puzzles be useful in some other way? And so he was also playing the Ace Attorney games around this same time. And so he wondered, what if it was a clue in a mystery? And so it was way back around this time where like the overall rough concept for the game was kind of concocted. And he even thought over time, like, surely I can't be the only one to have this idea. But the point of it being, like, he would try pitching it to different companies that he was working at, whether it was with writing or things like that. And not everyone would go for the idea. And this is where indie games are so important, because then you find a company like Mediatonic who finally said yes, and away we go. Murder by Numbers, crossing Picross with a visual novel murder mystery. The 90s era was picked for the story, not only because Ed Fear really likes the fashion, not only just personal taste, but also it gives it a distinct look when it comes to the game's screenshots. A lot of visual novels can like run together, but these flashy, garish 90s outfits can make the game stand out.
Garish is the right word for it. Like, Honor's shirt looks like it belongs on the carpet of an arcade.
And that's only your main protagonist, honestly.
I mean, that's how people dressed in the 90s.
True.
Everybody looked super dumb.
Have you seen The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air? But also, the 90s was an era devoid of smartphones. And this was important for the storytelling because, you know, Ed Fear notes that, like, I mean, for so many murder mysteries, like, when you have the world's information at your fingertips, like, how easy could it be to solve certain things? Well, not in the 90s, so set it there. In fact, Fear knew Hatomoa from previous work on Hatoful Boyfriend. When he pitched Moa on the project, Ed Fear happened to be visiting Japan for a video game music concert. He gave Moa the briefs for the different characters to, you know, help with their characters. And Moa noted that each character had Myers-Briggs personality types associated with them. I don't know if this is a common thing, but I think that's really interesting to like establish your characters' personalities in such a vivid, tangible way to help your character designers. Moa noted that the scientist Jenna was the easiest design. Like he said, as soon as he read it, he had this vision in mind immediately. But Scout took a long time, and there were many different ideas and revisions of what this character, this floating, smiling robot would look like. Because honestly, Scout's the most important character in the game. You have to get that design right. You have to get that look just right. And I think they did a great job. They made a pretty iconic character for the game.
Yeah, Scout's a fun little design. He's a flying CRT monitor. I think he's neat.
Mm-hmm. And he's got a little chippy, happy personality. Ultimately, though, Ed Fear notes that this was very much a, quote, I made something I wanted to play kind of project. And it's one of those, like, if you like it, that's great. You know, really, you know, focusing on like what the reviews say and hope that it resonates with people. But ultimately, the driving force behind the game is, I wanted this to be a thing, so it's a game that I would want to play, and I made it a thing. And I'm down with that.
I wish I had that type of willpower. One day.
It does sound really good, doesn't it? So, the game reviewed fairly well, with a Metacritic score of 78 on Switch and PC. Ultimately, the 90s is kind of an odd retro area to look back on. But yeah, those characters are extra stylish. They stand out. They are garish in their outfits, but they are memorable characters. They're written well. There's this kind of cheesiness to it that is very similar in tone to the Ace Attorney series. It's a very loving homage to it. I don't think ultimately the game lives up to either, the high benchmark that is an Ace Attorney visual novel murder mystery, or even some of like the best Picross games, but you sense the love in this project, and I totally agree. Like, it is one of the best tutorials on how to complete these nonogram puzzles. Like, honestly, for me to be as a complete novice and now loving Picross puzzles, I think it's a very fair stepping stone to take, going like from this game to Jupiter's series of Picross puzzles on Switch with S and S1, 2, 3, 4, all that. Yeah, as you mentioned, Joe, no awards yet. This isn't award season yet for games in 2020. But as much as I love the game, it's going to be a really tough year for indies in 2020. I mean, not even Mediatonic's own other game, Fall Guys. That's going to be one of the biggest indie games of the year. So I don't see it necessarily making the cut for indies at the big award shows. But as far as Legacy goes, there's a sequel tease at the end. I'd like to see a sequel made to this game, but we'll see. Depends on how well it does.
Yeah, I'd play a sequel. I hope it did well. I bought it. I gave them money. You gave them money.
Mm-hmm.
And you listening should give them money.
I agree. Now, you're probably wondering, you've talked about Masakazu Sugimori on Original Soundchat before. That was way early in the show's beginnings. It was episode 11 that you've already talked about Masakazu Sugimori. Who are you going to talk about for Murder by Numbers? Well, it turns out sometimes, you like to mention like a musician or something like that when associated with the project. And there's one other musician associated with the project. Let's talk about Rod Thomas. Rod Thomas was born on October 30th, 1982, in Neath, Wales. He is primarily known by the stage name of Bright Light, Bright Light. He learned several instruments as a child, including the piano, and he started in folk music, but this was honestly due to a lack of knowledge with production techniques because he says he was always drawn to house and synth-pop music. He studied English literature and creative writing at Warwick University before moving to London, setting up a music studio in his home, and busking in the tube stations during rush hours. Ultimately, in 2009, he sent some demo tracks to American producer Boom Bip, which resulted in Thomas being invited to Los Angeles for 2 weeks to work on some tracks together. He notes in his biography on his website that he is the first unsigned artist to perform on the Graham Norton Show in 2016. In fact, doing so alongside Elton John.
Ooh.
In fact, he got to tour the world, opening for artists like Elton John, Erasure, Scissor Sisters, Ellie Goulding, Hercules and Love Affair, and more. Most recently, he was the opening act for Cher's 2019 European tour.
That's a heck of a start, honestly. From nothing to opening for Cher.
Yeah, he's had a remarkable career, considering I honestly had not heard of Bright Light, Bright Light, but on his website, he notes that he, quote, makes pop music influenced heavily by cinema with nods to the 80s and 90s, his formative decades, in its colorful, effervescent presentation. When Rod Thomas is not making music as Bright Light, he runs a daytime dance party in New York, which ultimately also transfers to London when he's touring, called Romy and Michelle's Saturday Afternoon Tea Dance, which, if you know of Romy and Michelle, obviously that's named after one of his favorite films. He notes that The Legend of Zelda is one of his favorite game franchises, with Link's Awakening being his favorite in that series, and he is really inspired by the simplicity mixed with the complexity of early game music, such as from the Mario and Sonic series, which makes sense, being more drawn to 80s and 90s games. In fact, he noted that he didn't really like the look of the Link's Awakening Switch remake, just kind of more drawn toward those eras of his youth. You can follow him on Twitter at BrightLightX2. seems to be his handle across his social media platforms. So, as far as Bright Light goes, Murder by Numbers, I'm guessing, seems to be his only contribution to video games. This is not mentioned on his Wikipedia page or his artist website, though, because he is a successful musician on his own. He released one album as Rod Thomas in 2009, but then 3 main albums as Bright Light. There are other remix and live versions of those albums, though, the latest of which being 2016's Choreography. In fact, though, he has a new album coming out titled Fun City, due out on September 18th, 2020, and it features guest vocals from a wide variety of established and up-and-coming LGBTQ+ artists, with many of the songs on the album focusing on the themes and experiences of being in that community.
Huh. That's neat and also good timing on our part.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised to see that. So, the historical development research for Murdered by Numbers and its soundtrack, not too much. Like, there isn't an interview with Sugimori talking about his involvement with the project. I wish there was. But it was overall produced by Muse Sound, which is Sugimori's company. How does Bright Light involve with Murder by Numbers, though? I'll tell you, it involves the first track here on the Critical 5 tracks for Murder by Numbers. Let's start then with Honor's Theme.
Use your CPU, locate every clue, make the right connections, and we'll find what's true. Together, we will work it out. I'll protect your honor if you be my scout. 'Cause what's out there is a mystery. We'll shine a light of truth and make it clear to see that murder's never far away. We'll put our heads together and we'll save the day.
Use your CPU, locate every clue. Such a catchy song to just get right in there. This is the opening credits theme, at least for this version that has vocals. But then on the main menu, it's the same theme, just an instrumental version. And it's the main theme for your protagonist of Honor Mizrahi. What a bouncy, energetic main theme where like the leitmotif will carry on in other songs, and it's really memorable for this game, honestly. Not only just for being such a good piece of music, but starting every boot of the game with that. So the singer is Rod Thomas. Bright Light. Like, that's it. That's his involvement. That's the only non-Sugimori thing with the music. And how did he get involved? He says, quote, Ed Fear, who works on their creative team, was a fan of my music. And I did a fundraiser for this new record where people could buy handwritten lyrics or commission a song. He just emailed and asked if I had any interest in doing this. And I said, yes, I love computer games. Initially, I wrote the lyrics to it, but they wanted to go with something their composer had written just for simplicity's sake and publishing rights. So I just re-sang the lyrics they sent me and did it in an afternoon. It was super fun. So I'm glad there was at least a story there on how his involvement worked in, that they went with Sugimori's music, because, yeah, Sugimori did the composition for the work. But, wow, such an energetic, catchy main theme, and had to be here in the Critical 5.
Can I just comment that every time I listen to this song, the lyric, "'cause murder's never far away," always hits, and I'm like, that's dire. That's a dire lyric to put in your happy, bouncy song.
A little bit, but also at the same time, I'll protect your honor if you'll be my scout.
I like that lyric.
I love
that lyric's super good.
I love it. It's corny, but man.
It talks about how somebody's going to murder you. They're just waiting around every corner. It's like all this nice, like, supportive music, and then just like, but you might die one day. And it's like, what?
I think it means more like the case is an adventure, but adventure's 3 syllables and murder's 2, and that fits the melody better.
That's always the part but yeah, I'll protect your honor if you be my scout. That's my favorite lyric in the song. It's very, very good.
So good.
It's a great song. I will admit that upon loading this game up for the first time and hearing a vocal intro song, I was kind of shocked because I did not expect one, but I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, only vocal song in the game. And it's a good place for it, I think. Let's get to number 2 on the Critical 5 for Murder by Numbers with The Digital Detective. So we're going to talk about a few of these tracks where the best way we can describe where they take place in the game is it's a puzzle theme. It's what plays while you're working on the Picross puzzles. There's like 5 of them.
I think so.
We're going to play each of them for you, but we'll note that this is one of them. I think this is probably the most identifiable one, though, because like it's one of the earliest ones that plays. It plays the most often in the beginning of the game, and it makes sense. Like, you're learning how to either, get into the world of Murder by Numbers or learn how to play Picross puzzles. And you're also, in a way, with the plot, you're learning how to work with Scout. And that makes sense with like the digital detective. It's this really light and energetic synth melody, this little like it'll just get in your head as a good little earworm, but then it comes in with the electric guitar counter melody. It's such a good piece, and I feel like this one stands out the most as far as like the sound of the Murder by Numbers soundtrack, and it's Sugimori to a T. It's really out there and stands out well.
This is my favorite of the puzzle themes. I got excited every time this one came up. I like the other ones, but overall, like when this one came up, I was like, yeah, it's this one. Just the dun 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 dun. It's just so catchy and nice, and I like it. It's great.
Yeah, really good one. Let's get into another puzzle theme then here, number 3 on the Critical 5, On the Right Path. A little more chill, this one here. Got those kind of lounge drums with like the sound of like the drumstick hitting the rim of the drum a little bit. It's just, it sounds nice. You get some more synth. You get the dang, 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 the guitar. But it really just builds to that trumpet-like melody in the chorus. Da 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 da. Yeah, I think for showing 2 puzzle themes here in the Critical 5, it's like complete opposites with the high energy of like learning. Yeah, this is great. Scout, let's do this together. And then it's like, all right, we're just checking this one out and let's figure this one out. A little more chill here. So kind of opposite ends of the spectrum here.
I don't like it as a song as much, but it is definitely a lot more fitting to Picross. And if you're wondering like, oh, so these play when you're solving puzzles in specific, like, sort of areas or scenarios or something. No.
Not necessarily.
It plays one of them. Whenever you do a puzzle, it plays one of these songs, and I don't think there's any rhyme or reason as to which song it plays. It might even be randomized for all I know.
Sometimes it works, sometimes not so much, but you're more focusing on solving the puzzle, and it's good enough that it doesn't annoy you when you're playing the puzzle. Like all of these 5 are like really good, but just some are better than others, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Number 4 on the Critical 5. This is Scouts on the Case. Oh boy, we're cranking up that energy again. This is the theme for Scout. And I think it's super reflective that it's got that high energy. The synths are really going full speed because this is advanced technology in the 90s. You've got energy abound. I feel like nothing can stop you when you're listening to this theme. Like that's how it feels. Like everything's in overdrive. Let's go. Let's charge forward. And for Scout being the most important character in the game, I feel like it's also similarly the most important and most iconic character theme. Very similar in a sense then to some like the motifs in the Digital Detective song with the da 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 da. So that's a very Scout music element there, I think.
So this one also plays during puzzles, I believe. You can hear my favorite part in the clip, which is when everything just sort of drops out and it's the dun 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 dun. Because for some reason that part always really, really gets me. I don't know why, but that part feels really cool when filling out Picross puzzles.
Yeah, and then it builds back up. So I think that was an important one to include. But we got to wrap up the Critical 5 here with We've Got Them. Yeah, if you're listening to this and you're an Ace Attorney fan, you're like, boy, this sure is a Pursuit theme. And Sugimori sure knows how to write Pursuit themes.
Very much so a Pursuit theme, wow.
Does it stack up well to Ace Attorney's other Pursuit themes, like the famous cornered one from Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney? I don't think so. Part of that may be the music instrumentation. I don't know. But it is an important music cue in this game, and it at least gives you a similar kind of feeling. It's not courtroom setting intense, but it gives you that feeling of like, yes, you're honing in and you're closing in and putting pressure on the criminal. Like you're on the right track. You're getting very close to solving the case.
Yeah, it's. I think it might give some of the more modern Pursuit themes a run for their money, simply because, again, like you mentioned, it's the older ones are a lot more recognizable because of their chiptune sort of. It's not chiptune, but it's very retro feeling.
Yeah.
Whereas this one being like pseudo orchestrated fits a lot more with like Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think it would give those a run for their money, to be perfectly honest.
So yeah, it's a really good one to wrap up the Critical 5, I think. We've got a couple puzzle themes. We got the main theme. We got the most important character theme. We've got the Pursuit theme. But we also have tracks on the cutting room floor. Joe, you have two. Hit me with them.
My first one is Center of Attention. I don't know. This is the character Becky's theme. I love Becky. She's such a bad person, and I love her with all my heart.
Becky is the lead actress in Murder Mystery, whose Honor's character was a sidekick too.
And she's that Hollywood actress character who's like, I'm the lead actress.
I'm a diva.
And I'm the most important. I mean, the song is called Center of Attention. How much more information do you need? But I absolutely love her. I think the case that most closely centers around her is probably my favorite in the game, being case number 2.
Yes. Yep.
Because I think she gets some, like, really interesting character development in that case. I'm not going to lie. I really like Becky. I wish she was in the game more. I love this theme. This is one of my favorite songs in the game, actually. When I first heard it, I kind of just let it rock for a little while. That really rocky guitar piece and just the repeating the da da dun 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 da dun da dun da da. Like it's just a really good catchy piece. I love this song.
Yeah, it's definitely a good look at me, I'm the diva sort of thing.
It's very loud in your face.
Yes.
But other than that, the other song I have on the cutting room floor is another puzzle theme, being The Unbeatable Duo. This is another high energy one. It has some little bits and pieces of Honor's theme in there, which is really cool. Mm-hmm. Overall, all of the puzzle themes are good. Like, they're all really, really good. And this is another one of my absolute favorites. It's really high energy and fun.
Yeah, I feel like it works well in the cutting room floor because it is so similar to with using the motifs of Honor's theme, but it's an important one, and I do love the build of the chorus. That's such a good. Yeah, so good. My 2 on the cutting room floor. I'll hit you with the final. Well, no, not the final. The final one we're gonna save later. The 4th of 5 puzzle themes. This one is Got Your Back. I don't know, something about the like it's kind of like this swingy sound, the guitar sound in it. It's got a great groove to it. I think it's actually my favorite puzzle theme. It's not an important one though. I think it's more chilled out and not necessarily like solving a murder vibe to it, if that makes sense. There are bonus puzzles that you can complete after the game. It gives you some more replayability for the game. And I feel like if it's more there when there's like no stakes to complete the puzzle. So that's why I didn't include it in the Critical 5. But the overall sound and vibe of this one, it's my favorite of the puzzle themes.
I think this song, of all the songs in the entire soundtrack, this is the most you could stick it into an Ace Attorney game.
Yeah.
And I would not blink an eye.
Yeah, that's a good point.
This one feels like scenes that take place at Phoenix's office.
Oh, man, that'd be perfect. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Though this one, also on the cutting room floor, could also fit in there. This is Justice Takes Time. This is the theme for the might as well be voiced by Nick Offerman if the game had voice acting, Detective Cross, who is the gumshoe-like character in that he's a detective, but he's old, he's got a lot of experience, and he's
not as goofy as Gumshoe is.
Yeah, he's very, very curmudgeonly. But of course he's got that heart of gold, because of course he does. But, I mean, the saxy and trumpety lounge jazz, I mean, yes. Yes. This one, I think, could also fit. It's got a, if anything, a Godot-like vibe, if we're trying to compare it to Ace Attorney things. You could see it be like, oh, let me get my cup of coffee with this one. But honestly, it's got this slow, chill vibe because Cross is just too old for all this bouncy adventure music theme stuff.
That it keeps getting himself involved in all of it.
What a good soundtrack, though. What will I never forget about this game, though? How to play nonograms. I've downloaded a nonogram app. I've gone to websites with nonogram puzzles. I'm real close to buying these Jupiter Picross games on Switch honestly, but I have so many games to play, obviously. But yeah, when those were on sale, I'm like, oh gosh, do I just drop like $25 and buy all 4? Like, it's just coming off of Murder by Numbers. I feel like it's added a nice puzzling part to my life. And not puzzling in the, oh, I'm perplexed thing, but ways to spend time with puzzles and get that mental workout, though. I do agree with you that it drags on a little bit at the end, especially when you're trying to complete all the puzzles. And you're like, I just want to get to the end, and you're throwing all these evidence things for me to investigate.
The last case sort of has an issue where it's like, all right, the case is over, but we have some other story stuff that needs to happen now, because I assume they ran out of development time to make a 5th case, because some of that ending stuff feels like it was supposed to be its own case.
Yeah, probably. That would make sense. But yeah, that's what I would never forget. It taught me how to play Picross.
For me, I don't know, Scout's cute. Scout's fun. I want a sequel, and I want Becky to be more involved. Those are my demands. If they are not met, I'll still buy your game.
You heard us, Ed Fear.
The ultimatum has been placed. Do it, or I'll buy your game either way, but do it anyways. It's a very good game. It might be among my top 10. Again, I only recently hit like 10 games for the year. So it's not like I have a massive pool to pull from so far this year, but I think it's got a pretty like solid spot in the top 10 overall.
Yeah, I think this one probably better chance than Coffee Talk of you'll see it in our top 10 list at year's end.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. As much as I really, really love Coffee Talk, I would agree with that.
So, wraps up this episode of us talking about games from this year. Not only that, but indie games, visual novels. Go play both of these games. Honestly, you'd really, really enjoy them, I think, if you are the kind of person who likes reading with your adventures and learning about characters and this kind of thing. And learning about puzzling things all along the way. That'll do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakeasy. Joe is over at The Debaga. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, also at rhymeswithasia.com. But it's that MP3 podcast version that you want, hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Smasherpieces, is hosted. And you can find our podcasts on podcast storefronts all around the globe. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, YouTube Music, whatever it's called, but also on Spotify. And Spotify is where we not only have the podcast feed with all the episodes and all that, but a Spotify playlist. If we talk about a video game track on this show, and we highlight it there, and if it's on Spotify, it's getting added to that playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
Coffee Talk is, in fact, on Spotify. Murder by Numbers, when I search Murder by Numbers, I'm able to find a playlist with the soundtrack, but it's all, as far as I can tell, region locked to Japan or something. It's region locked to something that's not America.
Oh, Sugimori.
A little weird, but hey.
I wonder if that's the production company throwing its nose into things. That's unfortunate. It's such a great soundtrack. And then when you're done listening to all those on Spotify and other podcast services of choice, you can find us on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback for us. Give us some suggestions for new games for us to cover in the future. And also, just this week only, check out our pinned tweet for that No Straight Roads giveaway promotion, where we're giving away, helping them give away the soundtrack. So check out our pinned tweet there at Soundchat OST for instructions. You have until Thursday, September 3rd at the end of the day to enter.
And seriously, I can vouch for it. The soundtrack is very good. It might be one of my favorites of the year so far, honestly. So it's definitely worth owning, I think.
Absolutely. As far as bonus tracks go, if Best of 2018 is not already out, it will be out very shortly. So close to being done editing that one. It's always a monster to put those together because you have so many music tracks, but we're close. We're real close. And then we'll be recording 2017 shortly as well.
And we do longer clips for those too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that probably also doesn't help.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's about all we have to cover. Joe, who are we talking about next week?
Next week, I will be talking about Ikuko Mimori.
I will be talking about Yoshie Arakawa. Those are some good games coming up next week. You don't want to miss it. So to play us out, like you mentioned, how is there not any cover of even Honor's theme? Like, it would be such an easy thing to do, right? No, unfortunately not on YouTube, any fan covers, not on OC Remix. So I'll unfortunately have to play, like you, another song from the soundtrack. This is the final puzzle theme. I think this one, if anything, plays a little more often towards the end of the game. It's called Towards the Truth. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Sound Chat. We'll see you next time. Take care.